The Magnificent Battle, Merlin, Arthur's Court, and the Mistress of Time, by the Magus. Read by the Magus. Chapter 9, A Kick in the Ribs. Oh, was the next thing Damon thought, as he struggled to make sense of what was happening. He heard the sounds of that strange video game he had been playing during the night, the one he wanted to close and get away from. Damon was really confused. He didn't remember sitting down at the computer to play again. As he looked around, he didn't see a screen. In fact, he seemed to be outdoors. He didn't know where he was, only that something was terribly wrong, as the sounds of battle continued. He wondered if he were suffering from staying up too late. Then, as the cobwebs cleared, the thought circled through Damon's groggy head that this was the most realistic video game he had ever played. No, it was not at all like sitting in Papa's favorite chair, from which he had rooted his precocious younger sister and the obstinate massive cat who also preferred this chair to any other place in the house except Grandpa's lap. Nor was it like thumbing along on his beeping electronic device in a pixelated world of animated make-believe conflict, with one hand occasionally wandering into a popcorn bowl, then blindly ambling toward a cold drink on the small table beside him. No, the programmers had actually made it feel that he was really sitting in the grass, really feeling a cool breeze and the vibrations of the hooves of horses running through an imaginary field around him. The clever programmers had even managed to manufacture a smell. Wow, this is so realistic, he thought. There was actually an odor that was not pleasant, a combination of horses, including poop, sweat, body odor, dirt, and grass, not agreeable and very strong. The illusion was heightened when he felt a thump beside him. He looked to see an armor-covered man writhing in pain beside him, blood, dirt, and grass smeared all over his armor. Wow, Damon thought, how do they do this? This must be one of those new virtual reality games about knights and dragons and castles. This is amazing. For a moment, but just for a moment, he was excited about the game. Wait till I tell my cousin Fergus about this one. Then it got even more realistic. He heard the sound of yelling and saw what he thought was a virtual reality figure with a sword and dressed in battle garb. The figure ran over him, jumped over Damon, kicking him in the ribs with armor-covered feet as he went. Oh! Damon rubbed his suddenly aching ribs. Wait a minute, he muttered to himself. I don't get kicked in video games, even virtual reality games. A thundercloud of despair began to rise in his head, like an impending summer storm. Maybe this isn't a game. Just about that time, a horse covered with golden yellow cloth, ridden by a man dressed in armor, nearly ran over him. Something's wrong here. This is too realistic to be a game. Still believing him to be at the farm, Damon was reassured by seeing prone figures that he recognized as family. Hey guys, Damon said to a figure that was lying beside him, not the groaning armored man, but one more like him. There was no reply. Suddenly the realization came to him that they were in a very strange place. Hey guys, he tried to speak to his siblings and cousins. Hearing no answer, he repeated, "Hey, guys!" with a growing sense of alarm. The sounds of war and the wetness of the ground convinced them that this was definitely not a game. "Be quiet," Mikhail moaned as he turned over and tried to get back to the dream he'd been having of animals talking to each other and a tall, strange, very old man with a white bearded face addressing those animals in a weird language, then talking to the big black farm cat, then waving his arms and covering Mikhail with an invisible blanket that kept him warm, toasty, and deeply asleep. It was such a comforting dream that he didn't want it interrupted. Damon's words seemed to pull back that blanket and expose him to a reality that he did not want to confront. As older brother, however, Mikhail felt he had some authority to keep a younger brother quiet. "Leave me alone," he mumbled. "No, guys, wake up. Something's wrong." This time, Damon's sense of urgency convinced Mikhail to open his eyes. He sat up with a start and looked around. "What the—" he exclaimed. To Mikhail's surprise, he saw a place that looked amazingly like the place he had been in his dream, except not nearly so warm and pleasant. There was no strange old man, nor any talking animals that he could see, although there were horses galloping about. He was in a field surrounded by what appeared to be dense forest, through which he could see a broad meadow. He kicked Fergus on the butt a couple of times to rouse him from a stupor. "Hey, Fergus!" Mikhail kicked again. "Why, leave me alone," replied Fergus as he turned over and surrendered to the dark veil of smothering catatonia that held him pinned in its grasp. "I'm trying to get a little more sleep and forget about the dream I had. It was terrible. All this spinning and lights flashing," he muttered. "But it's pretty hard to sleep with all these noisy horse sounds and yelling. Will somebody turn down the television?" he half asked, half demanded. Getting no one to turn down the television, Fergus rose from the grass to turn it down himself, rubbed his eyes, then rubbed again. "Oh, no," he lamented, as he realized it was not a noisy television that confronted him. Rather, that terrible dream, or perhaps his worst nightmare, seemed to be coming true. "Looks like another adventure." "As much as I hate to admit it, looks like we've been carried away again to another time," Mikhail said, remembering that they had been transported before back in time. The experiences had been unnerving. Fergus looked at his cousins, then down at himself. "Not again," he moaned. "The only good thing about all this, that I can see, is that we get to look like we're older than we really are, and feel like we're older too." Fergus noticed that his body felt strangely matured for his age. He felt stronger, more muscular, taller. "Have we done a Rip Van Winkle and slept for a few years?" "Yeah, I feel different too, but forget that. How did we get to this place? I have no idea where we are." "Where did we get carried off this time?" Damon asked. No one had an answer, of course. Finally, Mikhail said, "Well, not that I'm glad to be in some unknown place, but don't complain too much. Last time we got carried off, we saw some pretty nifty stuff, what with the ancient Olympics, and met some interesting people." "Yeah, but we had some pretty scary moments too," Damon said. "Remember Krista getting caught by that greasy guy, and those horrible men who wanted to throw that Calypso girl off the mountain for being a girl at the Olympics? That's not even to mention that crystal weapon thing that old witch tried to shoot us with, and those snakes," added Fergus. "I'll never forget those snakes she wore around her neck." "Yes, but how many of our friends have eaten grapes with Alexander the Great and Philip of Macedon, or had a conversation with a goddess?" asked Mikhail. Okay. Fergus didn't want to argue the point. "But what about now? Where are we? And where are the girls?" The girls to which Fergus was referring to were his cousins, Krista and Asher. They had been with him at the farm. On their last adventure, something had made them invisible. "Maybe they're here, but we just can't see them. Asher? Krista? Are you guys around here?" There was no reply. "Maybe they didn't get caught up in this adventure," Mikhail speculated. "Maybe this is just an adventure for boys. No girls allowed." "Somehow I doubt it. But it could be. Still, I'm worried because they aren't here," Fergus said as he looked around at the field and the deep woods, searching for Asher and Krista. About that time, the boys heard the fast-approaching sound of horses running. Damon yelled with alarm, "Hey, that guy is going to run over us!" Fergus, who had been looking in the other direction, cried, "And that guy too!" pointing in the opposite direction to another knight on horseback, coming straight at them with his lance in attack position. Mikhail yelled, "Hey, we're in the middle of one of those," Fergus completed his sentence, "jousts." Looking around and seeing lots of knights in furious combat, he added, "Even worse, we're in the middle of a battle. Let's get out of here." Just in time, the boys rolled out of the way of charging horses. The sound of snapping wood cracked over their heads, and once again there was a thump as one of the knights screamed and fell to the ground with a heavy thud beside Fergus. Fergus could see nothing of the actual man, only the armor which covered him from head to toe. The man inside the metallic suit groaned and struggled to get to his feet. He turned his metallic glance toward Fergus as he attempted to regain his composure. Then he stopped. The knight took a look at Fergus and opened his visor to get a better look. He had not seen anyone or anything quite like Fergus. He turned his head from side to side as he closely examined him and looked at his clothes and cocked his head while looking at his running shoes. Then he reached out his heavily gloved hand and touched Fergus's glasses. "What be these?" he mumbled. "Of what land are ye?" Before Fergus could answer, the sound of a horse approaching alerted the knight, and he turned just in time to fend off a powerful swipe of a sword coming from the horseman, who took the swing, then rode off to confront another knight some distance away. Fergus looked around to see his cousins running for the cover of some woods not far in the distance. "Come on, Fergus!" he heard Damon yell as he ran. Fergus looked back at the face half hidden inside the uncomfortable-looking helmet. It was young, and not nearly as large or impressive as the helmeted head would make him appear. There was little time for reflection, however, as the knight pushed down the visor and turned to confront another charging, sword-swinging knight. Fergus turned and ran toward his cousins. The knights in the field were far too busy fending off potentially fatal blows to pay attention to three lads in T-shirts and shorts, not very effective battle gear, who had gotten mixed up in their quarrel. The boys made it to the woods, then turned and watched as more knights jousted and fought with spears and swords. The scene would have been beautiful if not so brutal. The knights were all clad in armor, while their horses were dressed in brightly colored cloth that appeared to cover some kind of plates of protection, armor of a type. They needed it, too. The men who were racing at each other with lances and slashing at each other with their swords were just as likely to swing into thin air or to strike the horses as they were other knights. The boys watched with amazement at the ferocity of the battle. Then another rider appeared. He was riding a jet-black horse, and he himself was dressed in equally black robes, making the contrast with his white beard even more striking. The black rider went over to one of the warriors, one who appeared more richly dressed than the others, and they had some kind of communication. Then the lavishly dressed warrior called to his men. The fighting stopped, and they all assembled around him. The opposing force had no such organization. There were knights on foot scattered over the entire field who had fallen from their horses, and of those still on horses, there was not a lance among them that was not broken. They were clearly the losers. The richly dressed warrior surveyed the battlefield, then turned and rode off with his knights following him. When they were a significant distance away, one where it seemed certain that they would not come back, the defeated knights began yelling shouts that the boys could not understand, but interpreted as obscene comments, especially when one turned his bare arse and smacked it 3 or 4 times before they all walked or rode off in the other direction, leaving the boys still hiding, but watching from the woods alone to themselves. Or so they thought. Before leaving, however, the black rider in the black robe on the jet-black horse stopped and looked in the direction of the boys. Could he see them? Mikhail wondered to himself. It was as if he could sense them somehow. The rider turned his horse and began slowly riding toward them until he was at the edge of the woods, as close as he could ride without leaving the field. Suddenly there was a flash of light and a loud explosion just to the side of the boys. "Holy cow!" Fergus yelled. "Look, behind us. There's a guy who is, shooting, trying to kill us." Then they saw the rider racing toward the blue-robed figure behind them. There was another flash of light, and a ball of fire sped from the rider's staff over their heads. The boys heard a sharp cry behind them. They turned to see a man in a blue robe with white stripes that looked like sewn-on cloth snakes coiling around him. He was on the ground, apparently knocked there by the flash from the Black Rider's staff. He stumbled to his feet, grabbing at limbs and trees for support. After a moment, he turned and ran away. The Black Rider watched him go. Then he said in a loud voice, "Beware the men in blue robes. They seek to bring failure to your mission, and they needs have great fear of failure." He paused for a moment, perhaps for a reply from the boys, but there was none. "I am called by my king, but we shall meet again anon." With that, the rider turned and rode off after the victorious knights. "What was that all about?" Fergus asked. "And who were those guys? And why would one want to shoot at us or kill us? And the rider, he looked kind of like the guy in my dream." "He apparently saved us from the man in the blue robe, but how did he do it?" Damon asked. "And what mission? I don't want a mission. I want to go back to sleep and forget this whole thing," Fergus protested. "Sorry," Mikhail mumbled. "I think we are in another time, and it appears that magic is a part of it." A feeling of panic washed through their heads as they silently looked over the field until Mikhail finally said, "I guess we'd better think of what to do next."